The rise and fall of military rule in Nigeria. Imagine waking up one morning to find tanks rolling through your city streets. The radio announces that your government has been overthrown, your constitution suspended, your elected leaders detained. This wasn't a dystopian movie. This was Nigeria's reality for nearly 3 decades. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most turbulent periods in African history, the rise and fall of military rule in Nigeria. This is a story of coups and counter-coups, of promises and betrayals of a nation that fought its way back to democracy. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we're about to take you on a journey through power, corruption, resistance, and ultimately, redemption. Nigeria gained independence from Britain on October 1st, 1960, with hopes as bright as the African sun. The nation was rich in resources, diverse in culture, and full of promise. But within 6 years, everything would change. The military would seize power, and what followed was a 29-year period where khaki uniforms replaced civilian suits and decrees replaced democracy. Let's rewind to 1960. Nigeria's independence was celebrated across the nation. The green-white-green flag was raised for the first time. Leaders like Nnamdi Azikiwe and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa were steering a new ship called Nigeria. 3 regions, North, East, and West, each with distinct ethnic groups, the House of Fulani, Igbo, and Yoruba, were supposed to work together in harmony. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The 1964 federal elections were marred by massive irregularities and violence. Politicians were more interested in regional power than national unity. Corruption became rampant. The census figures were disputed. Ethnic tensions simmered. And the average Nigerian? They watched as a dream of independence turned into a nightmare of political chaos. Picture this. You're a young Nigerian in 1965. You believe in the promise of independence, but now you see politicians fighting over money and power while your family struggles to eat. The government seems distant, corrupt, ineffective. Sound familiar? These same frustrations fuel political instability everywhere, even today. Then came January 15th, 1966. A group of young military officers, mostly from the Igbo ethnic group in the southeast, decided they'd had enough. Led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu and others, they struck in the dead of night. Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa was assassinated. The Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, was killed. The Premier of the Western Region, Samuel Akintola, was also murdered. The plotters claimed they were saving Nigeria from corrupt politicians. But here's where things get complicated. The coup was largely seen as an Igbo coup because most of the plotters were Igbo, and mostly northern and western leaders were killed, while eastern leaders were spared. This perception would have devastating consequences. Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, the most senior military officer and an Igbo man, took power, not as a coup plotter, but to restore order. He promised to hand over power to civilians soon. That promise was never kept. 6 months later, on July 29, 1966, northern military officers struck back. They killed Ironsi and many Igbo officers in what was clearly a revenge mission. Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a northerner and a Christian from the Middle Belt, emerged as a new head of state. The stage was now set for something even darker, civil war. But we'll get to that. Under Gowon's leadership, Nigeria descended into civil war. The eastern region, feeling marginalized and targeted, seceded and declared itself the Republic of Biafra in May 1967 under Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu. What followed was a brutal 3-year war that claimed between 1 and 3 million lives, mostly from starvation. The images of starving Biafran children shocked the world. Families were torn apart. An entire generation was traumatized. And when Biafra finally surrendered in January 1970, Nigeria was supposed to heal. Gowon declared no victor, no vanquish, and promised reconciliation. There was genuine hope. Oil money was flowing. Nigeria was riding the petroleum boom of the 1970s. But prosperity and military rule make dangerous bedfellows. Gowon had promised to hand over power to civilians by 1976. But in October 1974, he announced that the transition was unrealistic. In other words, the military was too comfortable to leave. Think about it. Once you've tasted absolute power, where you don't have to campaign, debate, or answer to voters, why would you give it up? This is the trap that caught Nigeria for decades. On July 29, 1975, exactly 9 years after the coup that brought him to power, Gowon was overthrown while attending an OAU summit in Uganda. General Murtala Mohammed took over and became one of Nigeria's most celebrated military rulers. Murtala was different. He was decisive, disciplined, and seemed genuinely committed to change. He purged the civil service, moved the capital from Lagos to Abuja, and set a clear timetable for return to civilian rule. Nigerians were excited again. But just 7 months into his rule, in February 1976, Murtala was assassinated in a failed coup attempt. Nigeria mourned. His deputy, General Olusegun Obasanjo, took over and, to everyone's surprise, actually kept Murtala's promise. In October 1979, Nigeria returned to civilian rule. Alhaji Shagari became president in what seemed like a new dawn. The Second Republic had begun. There were elections, a constitution, hope. But old habits die hard. Corruption returned with a vengeance. The economy, heavily dependent on oil, crashed when prices dropped. Politicians squabbled. And just 4 years later, on New Year's Eve 1983, the military struck again. Major General Mohammed Buhari and his second-in-command, Tony Zidiagbin, were strict disciplinarians. They launched a war against indiscipline, a campaign to instill order, punctuality, and respect for authority. Soldiers would flog people for not queuing properly or for littering. It sounds almost comical now, but imagine soldiers whipping you with koboko for jumping a queue. That was Nigeria in 1984. They fought corruption aggressively, but their methods were harsh. Press freedom was restricted. Critics were jailed. The economy remained in crisis. Nigerians grew tired of the iron fist. In August 1985, General Ibrahim Babangida overthrew Buhari in what he called a palace coup. Babangida, known as IBB, was charming, calculating, and Machiavellian. He smiled as he centralized power. IBB promised to return Nigeria to democracy and began a transition program that seemed endless. He kept shifting the goalpost. 1990, then 1992, then 1993. He banned old politicians, unbanned them, created new political parties, dissolved them, created 2 state-sanctioned parties, the Social Democratic Party and the National Republican Convention. Under Babangida, Nigeria adopted a structural adjustment program that devastated the poor. The naira was devalued. Subsidies were removed. Poverty exploded. But IBB and his inner circle grew incredibly wealthy. Finally, on June 12, 1993, Nigeria held what is widely regarded as its freest and fairest election. Moshood Abiola, a wealthy Yoruba businessman running on the SDP ticket, won convincingly across ethnic and religious lines. Nigerians celebrated. Then Babangida annulled the election. Just like that, the will of millions of Nigerians was thrown away. The reasons given were murky and unconvincing. The real reason? The military elite wasn't ready to give up power, and some northern power brokers couldn't accept a southern president. The annulment sparked massive protests. Civil society awakened. Organizations like the Campaign for Democracy mobilized millions. Nigeria was on the brink. Babangida stepped aside in August 1993, installing a weak interim government headed by Ernest Khan. But in November 1993, General Sani Abacha, the defense minister, seized power in the most brazen coup yet. Abacha's regime was the darkest chapter of military rule. He ruled with absolute brutality. Activists were arrested, tortured, killed. Ken Saro-Wiwa, the environmental activist fighting for the Ogoni people, was hanged in 1995 along with 8 others despite international outcry. Moshood Abiola, the rightful winner of the June 12th election, was arrested when he declared himself president. He would die in custody in 1998, just as he was about to be released. Abacha looted Nigeria blind. Billions of dollars disappeared into foreign accounts. He orchestrated a sham transition program designed to transform himself into a civilian president. All 5 government-created parties nominated him as their candidate. It was farcical, but Nigerians resisted. Underground movements like Nadeko kept the pro-democracy flame alive. Journalists published from exile. Musicians like Fela Kuti sang songs of resistance. Ordinary Nigerians refused to be silenced. Then, on June 8, 1998, something unexpected happened. Abacha died suddenly. The official story was a heart attack, but rumors swirled. Some said poison. Some said he died in the company of Indian prostitutes. Whatever the truth, Nigeria breathed a collective sigh of relief. General Sani Abacha took over and promised a swift transition to democracy. Unlike his predecessors, he kept his word. Elections were scheduled and held in early 1999. And in a twist of irony, the man who won the presidential election was General Olusegun Obasanjo, the same Obasanjo who had handed over power in 1979, but who had been imprisoned by Abacha for an alleged coup plot. On May 29, 1999, Obasanjo was sworn in as president of the Fourth Republic. Military rule in Nigeria officially ended. The khaki boys went back to the barracks, at least officially. So what brought down military rule in Nigeria? Several factors. First, international pressure. After Abacha hanged Ken Saro-Wiwa, Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. Sanctions were imposed. The country was becoming a pariah state. Second, economic collapse. Military mismanagement had destroyed the economy. The infrastructure was crumbling. Poverty was widespread. Even the military elite could see the system was unsustainable. Third, internal fractures. The military itself was divided. Not every officer supported continued military rule. Some were genuinely patriotic and saw that the institution was being destroyed. Fourth, and most importantly, the Nigerian people refused to give up. From students to market women, from journalists to lawyers, from artists to activists, Nigerians fought for democracy. They were beaten, jailed, killed, but they didn't stop. June 12th became a symbol. Pro-democracy groups mobilized. Civil society became a powerful force. The middle class, which had benefited from oil boom years, was being impoverished and they demanded change. But here's the thing, military rule didn't just end and disappear without a trace. It left deep scars on Nigeria that are still visible today. The military normalized corruption. During those years, stealing public funds became almost expected. The phrase settlement entered the Nigerian vocabulary. Accountability vanished because military rulers answered to no one. They destroyed institutions. The civil service, judiciary, education system, healthcare, everything was weakened because military rulers governed by decree, not law. They militarized society. Nigerians became used to seeing force as a solution to problems. Political thuggery, which is still rampant today, has roots in the military era when violence was a tool of governance. They created a big man culture where individual strongmen mattered more than systems. This is why personality still dominates Nigerian politics over ideology or institutions. And perhaps most tragically, they wasted decades. Imagine where Nigeria could be if those 29 years had been spent building democratic institutions, infrastructure, and human capital instead of enriching military elites. The story of military rule in Nigeria offers lessons that resonate far beyond Nigeria's borders. Lesson 1. Democracy is fragile, especially when it's young. Nigeria's first republic collapsed because civilian politicians were more interested in power than in building strong institutions. They created the vacuum that the military filled. Lesson 2. The military is trained to fight wars, not govern nations. Every military regime in Nigeria, even those that started with good intentions, eventually became corrupt and repressive. Guns cannot build schools, bullets cannot create jobs, and decrees cannot replace dialogue. Lesson 3. Never underestimate the power of ordinary people. The military had guns, money, and power, but they couldn't suppress the Nigerian spirit. When millions of people decide they want change, even the most brutal dictator cannot stop them. Lesson 4. Resource wealth without accountability is a curse, not a blessing. Nigeria's oil revenue should have transformed the country. Instead, they fueled corruption and funded military excess. The resource curse is real. Lesson 5. Memory matters. Nigeria celebrated June 12th as Democracy Day starting in 2019, 26 years after the stolen election. Remembering our history, the good and the bad, helps us avoid repeating mistakes. Here's something ironic. In 2023, Nigeria elected Bola Ahmed Tinubu as president. In 2015 and 2019, Muhammadu Buhari, the same military ruler from 1984, was elected president. Obasanjo, another former military leader, served 2 civilian terms from 1999 to 2007. This raises an uncomfortable question. Did military rule really end, or did it just change uniforms? Some argue that Nigeria's democracy is still dominated by those who benefited from or participated in military rule. The same networks of power, the same political godfathers, the same corrupt systems, just with elections now. Others argue that while imperfect, civilian rule is still better than military dictatorship. At least now Nigerians can vote, protest, criticize their leaders on social media, and occasionally see leaders leave office peacefully. Both perspectives have merit. Democracy in Nigeria is messy, frustrating, and often disappointing. But it's still democracy. Elections can still spring surprises. Leaders can still be voted out. Change is still possible. Young Nigerians today, especially those born after 1999, have no memory of military rule. They've only known civilian government, and they're demanding better. The EndSARS protests in 2020 showed that a new generation is rising that refuses to accept the status quo. They are tech-savvy, globally connected, and unwilling to be intimidated. They've seen what's possible in other countries, and they're asking, why not Nigeria? This generation doesn't want to choose between military dictators or corrupt civilians. They want accountable governance, functional institutions, and opportunities to thrive. The fall of military rule in Nigeria wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the end of one dark chapter. The work of building a truly democratic, prosperous Nigeria continues. Nigeria's experience mirrors that of many African nations. Military rule plagued Ghana, Sudan, Mali, Guinea, Chad, and dozens of other countries. Some, like Ghana, have successfully transitioned to stable democracies. Others still struggle. The Nigerian story reminds us that freedom is never given freely. It must be fought for, defended, and constantly renewed. Democratic backsliding can happen anywhere when citizens become complacent or when leaders become authoritarian. For 29 years, Nigeria was ruled by men in uniform who promised order and delivered chaos, who claimed to fight corruption while looting the treasury, who said they were caretakers but refused to leave. But they underestimated the Nigerian spirit. They underestimated people like Goni Fawehinmi, the fearless lawyer who challenged military decrees in court. They underestimated journalists like Dele Jiwa, who was killed by a letter bomb but whose legacy inspired others. They underestimated students who protested despite bullets, and market women who closed their shops in solidarity with democracy activists. Military rule fell not because the generals suddenly became benevolent, but because Nigerians made it impossible for them to continue. That's the power of collective action. Today, Nigeria's democracy is imperfect. Corruption persists. Elections are sometimes flawed. Politicians often disappoint. But Nigerian citizens can vote, speak freely, organize, and demand change without fear of military tribunals or midnight arrests. That's not nothing. That's everything. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves history or African affairs. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. What do you think? Is Nigeria's democracy strong enough to prevent military rule from ever returning? What lessons can other countries learn from Nigeria's experience? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love the discussions we have here. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Whether you're in Nigeria, America, India, or anywhere else, your participation matters. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never take your freedom for granted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.